In this section, we are going to discuss social networks and obesity, and this lends itself from the foresight map where we looked at social psychology and as one of the important nodes or areas of causation that can increase an individual's risk for obesity. But what evidence is there potentially to support the fact that our friends and families and the people that we associate with can influence our weight? So we have to start with a seminal 2007 paper from Christakis et al. This paper, when it came out, was all over the news because there was headlines that ran to the extent of, if you're fat, blame your fat friends. Or if your friends are large, it might be your fault. So it was big news when this study came out because it showed using a social network model, it showed that our weight status by means that aren't clear from the study is potentially influenced by those around us, okay? So there's a couple things you need to know before we explore this study. Number one is that they used Framingham Heart Study data. So you've learned about the Framingham Heart Study probably in your courses when you're learning about cardiovascular disease, because that itself was a seminal study that really identified the main risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And if you remember the Framingham study, it started in Framingham, Massachusetts back in the 70s. And basically they started with about 5,000 people and they asked them a bunch of questions. They determined their BMI, they collected lipid data, they collected cholesterol data, etc. But they also kept information about who your friends were and who your family was. And who your neighbors were, so they could keep track of people in case, they went off or they moved, etc. Okay, so they had information about who's my friend. I'm an ego. Okay, so you need to learn this term. I'm an ego, and if I have a friend or I have a cousin or I have a mother or a father, they're my alter. So ego is the person, alter is someone that they're linked with. So what they wanted to do in this study, so in the Christakis study, is they took that same information and they said, is there a relationship between someone's mom and a person's risk of obesity, someone's neighbor and someone's risk of obesity, someone's friend and someone's risk for obesity? And one of the most beautiful things they got out of this study was this beautiful network diagram. And I'll actually let them explain it themselves. So let me pull up this a video from this study explaining what those little dots, etc. mean. Okay.
This animation is a dynamic graphic representation of a portion of the Framingham Heart Study social network. Each circle or node represents one person in the dataset. Nodes with red borders are women, and nodes with blue borders are men. The size of each node is proportional to each person's body mass index, or BMI, which is the weight in kilograms divided by the square of the height in meters. A yellow node represents an obese person with a BMI greater than 30, and a green node represents a non-obese person. A line between two nodes represents a social connection between two people. Purple lines connecting nodes denote close genetic ties, for example, parents, children, and siblings. Gray lines denote non-genetic relations, such as friends and spouses. Obesity is a multicentric epidemic, with many people influencing one another and forming ties in complex ways. The network gets more compact and dense as more ties appear, and the entire network gets heavier over time. Quantitative analyses demonstrate a tendency for obese people and non-obese people to form clusters within the network, so that by the end of the study, this clustering can be discerned, as in the densely interconnected clusters of obese persons here, and the non-obese persons here. The prevalence of obesity appears lower at the periphery of the network as compared with the center.
So this study showed that over time, first of all, the population got larger. There was an increase in obesity over the study period, but also they found that individuals with obesity tend to cluster in groups, as well as individuals that are leaner tend to cluster in groups as well. Okay, so we just looked at that animation. And when they teased out the data a little bit more, they started to look at relationships in particular. And what they found is that if someone had a close friend that became obese, so the person was lean, okay, so my close friend, we're both lean to begin with, but this close friend became obese during that study period, my risk of becoming obese during that study period also increased. Okay, so my BMI, increases in my BMI were similar to the increase in BMI of my alters. Okay, and the relationship that seemed to predict increases in obesity the most is something called a mutual friend. So mutual friend, by their definition, means that I say, so I'm the ego and there's an alter, and I say that that alter is my close friend, and when that alter is asked, they say that I'm their close friend. So we each identify each other as a close friend. Okay, that's a mutual friend. And if we both agree that we're good friends, chances are we are good friends. Okay, if we have that kind of relationship, according to this study data, if my close friend became obese, my chances of becoming obese in that same study period were over 170%. So it greatly increased the risk of obesity. If I look at all different types of friends, there was a 57, if I group that data, there was about a 57% chance that if one of my friends, not even a close friend necessarily, gained a lot of weight during that study period, that I would as well. Okay, so this basically showed the closeness of friendship was relevant to the likelihood that one friend would become obese and another one would also become obese. Okay, so the question is how? If my friend is becoming obese during a study period, why am I also becoming obese during that study period? Okay, so they proposed some potential mechanisms. Okay, so obesity and alters might influence obesity and egos by diverse psychosocial means, such as changing the ego's norms about the acceptability of being overweight. So if my friend gains a lot of weight during a period, then I might think, well, it's okay if I gain some weight. You know, it might change my perceptions about what's an okay weight status versus what's a not okay weight status. And these are proposed mechanisms. They also suggest that it might be more directly related to an influence of behaviors. So if my friend, so not about norms, but more about behaviors. So if my friend is sitting around eating pizza and playing video games on Friday night, I might be doing the same thing. Right? If my friend's running ultramarathons and doing the grind every weekend, maybe I'm more likely to do the same too. The converse might also be true. Okay. So to tease out a little bit more about the reason why our friends might influence our weight status, we kind of took this experiment and tried to tease out some more kind of psychosocial determinants. Okay. So Hrushka and et al. Interviewed women about body weight. This is a 2011 study. And they also tracked their friends and family members and asked the same question. So they were looking for similarities in perceptions, similarity in norms, etc. So their two research questions they had was, number one, can we verify Christakis' data? Is what they said holding up? Okay. And is there a correlation between the ego's norms, my norms, okay, about body size, and the alter, that other person's norms about body size? Okay, so is it norms? That's the question they're asking. Is it norms that's influencing the spread of obesity? Okay, so the solid circles are Christakis' data, and the open circles are this Hrushka's data. And they actually found that the chance, again, that if I have a mutual friend, we both say that we're mutual friends, that becomes obese, my chance of becoming obese during that same period is significantly higher. Okay, so they've confirmed Christakis's findings from this study that we just looked at. Okay, their second question was about the why. Okay, so they had 3 proposed pathways as to why, if my friend gains weight, I might, or if my friend's larger, I might be at a higher chance of being larger as well. So one of the proposed pathways by which that relationship unfolds is that me and my friend, I'm ego, they're alter, me and my friend share the same body norms. And because we have the same body norms, we have similar behaviors and we have similar BMIs. Our BMIs change according to our behavior is influenced by our shared norms, and that behavior leads to a similar BMI. Another pathway that they proposed is that, okay, I don't have the same norms about body size as my friend. However, when I see my friend at a particular size or I see my friend's norms, I change my behavior to fit their norms. Okay, so my norms aren't the same as theirs, but I change my behavior to kind of act the same way as they do, even if I don't have those same internalized norms. The other pathway that they proposed is that if my alter has a certain BMI, that changes my perception. I have a different norm about what's an acceptable BMI, but when I see my friends are larger, that might shift my perception about what's an acceptable size. That might shift my norm, and I change my behavior accordingly. So we don't start sharing the same norms, but my friend's size influences my own norms about BMI. Okay, so if I'm hanging out with larger people, then I think that it's okay to be, I'm like, oh, it's actually okay to be larger, and I shift my behaviors accordingly. Okay, or the alternate could be true as well. I'm hanging out with smaller people. Okay, well, my perceptions about what's normal have changed, and now I'm going to change my behavior accordingly. Okay, but does this hold? So these are the proposals. Do these hold? Do these match up? And basically, the only pathway that they saw that they could find statistically significant results were for the third pathway. But they found the relatively small influence of that alters norms on the effect on my BMI. Okay. We did find some evidence for pathway 3 by which a network member's BMI may influence my desired body size, which in turn influences my behavior and my BMI. Okay. However, that only accounts probably for about 20% of the differences in the changes in BMI. So what does this all mean? That's a good question. So we know social networks can influence our weight status. Okay, and that makes sense as far as social acceptability of weight and shared behaviors. This study right here suggests that there might be something about seeing what is an ideal body size in our friends and that influencing our own norms about what an ideal body size is and us changing our behaviors accordingly. But that's only a small piece of the puzzle. So the true answer is from all of this is we don't really know why our friends can have such an influence on our weight status. Okay, that being said, do we need to know, or just is knowing that there is a relationship enough? So questions remain. So is the clustering of obesity in social and geographical networks due to social contagion, which is what the network data suggested, that those bubbles suggested, or is it due to shared environments, or is it due to self-selection? Okay. And are we influenced by those in our social networks, or do we choose social networks based on common behaviors? So is it that I see that these people are this way, so I'm friends with them? Or am I already friends with these people and then I start doing what they're doing? Okay, or do I self-select into particular groups because they're all, athletes? Or do I self-select into other groups because they're all into video games or whatever? Okay, or am I friends with people first and then I'm influenced by their behavior? That's not clear either. Okay, so to examine these things a little bit further, a more recent experiment from over the periods of 2016 and 2017, really interesting natural experiment in military bases in the United States. Okay, so what's important to know in this study is that military personnel don't get a choice. They don't get to pick often, unless they're really high up. They don't get to pick which bases they get assigned to. Okay, so you're at this base and then I say, hey, you're moving over here. Okay, so there's self-selection is gone. Also, the environments between the different bases are all pretty similar. They all kind of look the same. They all look something like this. Okay? So, and they're usually away from like a big city. They're not like in the heart of a city. They're kind of their own compound. A lot of cases. Okay, of course, there's differences. Okay, so what they looked at is when certain families, and these are the kind of families they looked at, when certain families moved to this base versus other families moved to this base versus other families moved to this base. If we looked at the different bases and we looked at the average BMIs of the people at the different bases, okay, they're not going to be the same. Let's say one base has an average BMI of 23, the other one has an average BMI of 25, the other one has an average BMI of 27. I don't know, okay? So if I get put into a different base, does my weight change to kind of match up with theirs? Okay, so is it social contagion? Because again, the environments are very similar and there's no self-selection, okay? And what this study suggested is that social contagion does play some sort of role, okay? So a 1 percentage point higher county obesity rate was associated with a higher BMI and greater odds of obesity, okay, in parents. So if I moved to a base with a higher BMI than my own, I'm more likely to match that BMI, okay? Same with children as well, okay? And if a person spent more time at a particular base with a particular BMI, over time their BMI seemed to kind of match theirs, okay? And it could go down or it could go up to more match those, okay? Again, suggesting social contagion. Exposure to counties with higher rates of obesity was associated with higher BMI and higher odds of overweight and obesity in parents and children. Okay? There's no evidence to support self-selection or shared built environment. So again, the why are we changing our behaviors? Why are we changing our BMI is still unclear. It's not that we self-select to hang out with people with higher BMIs according to the results of this study. And it's not just the built environment that's influencing it. There's something about the people that we're around, is what the study suggests, that is influencing our own BMIs. So it could be shared behavior still, it could be shared norms still, okay? Although it's harder to kind of tease that all out, okay? So what this whole section really focuses on is the fact that social networks can have an influence on an individual's likelihood for obesity. Check, okay? That said, how can learning about this help us with respect to treating obesity? So if social networks that are larger than ours can promote us getting larger, could the inverse also be true? Could we exploit social networks which are very powerful for influencing behavior to promote, let's say, healthier behaviors or healthier weights, okay? And we'll try to look at some of that stuff when we talk about obesity management in a bit, okay? So take-home messages: social networks seem to influence obesity, according to that Christakis paper that showed that if my close friend, and they say I'm a close friend, if one of us gains a lot of weight during a period of time, the other person's likely to as well, okay? Harushka confirmed that, again, this same result that I just talked about, but it might not necessarily be about shared norms, okay? Although there might be a little bit of norm influencing, okay? Another study that supported the effect of social influence was this natural military experiment that we just looked at, and showed that when we live around people that are larger than us, we are more likely to perhaps change our behavior to match that larger size. Okay, especially if we're there for longer, we're more likely to match that size after a while. So again, showing that social networks have an influence on obesity. And then I'm always thinking, like, how can we use this to our advantage, which is something we'll look at later this semester.